a private birth, hidden timelines, and a staged pregnancy. When Letterman presented the claim, it wasn't loud or sensational. It was calm, precise, and powerful enough to leave Trump questioning how he had ever walked into that studio thinking he was in control. It was a night that nobody expected. Donald Trump, the President of the United States in 2025, arrived at David Letterman's late-night show with his usual swagger. He walked in smiling, confident that he knew exactly how the evening would unfold. For years, he had appeared on countless shows, faced reporters, and navigated interviews that could unsettle almost anyone. This, he thought, would be just another chance to charm a television audience and steer the conversation. Letterman greeted him warmly, the kind of calm smile that made you feel relaxed. Trump returned it, thinking the interaction would be friendly and simple, but as soon as the cameras started rolling, Letterman did something no one in the audience, and certainly not Trump, expected. He spoke with a quiet authority that carried more weight than any loud announcement could. Barron Trump is not Melania's son, Letterman said. The words hung in the air. A wave of shock swept through the audience. Murmurs rose and even some of the crew momentarily stopped their work. Trump paused mid-step, his confident smile faltering. Letterman's voice didn't waver. He didn't shout, he didn't taunt, he didn't even rise from his chair. He simply stated what seemed impossible, almost casually. Then he delivered the kicker. He is the child of Donald Trump and Ivanka. The room went silent, the kind of silence that makes people lean in without realizing it. For Trump, it was as if the ground had shifted. Beneath his feet, he had faced opposition, criticism, and scandals before, but this was personal, in a way nothing else had been. The claim Letterman had just made wasn't about policy or politics. It was about family, secrecy, and something so sensitive that it could shake even the most confident man. Letterman, with a calm and deliberate tone, explained what he meant. The story, he said, was that Melania had never actually carried Barron. The pregnancy everyone had seen. The photographs, the public appearances, the carefully curated media moments had been staged. According to the host, the real story was far more complex. Ivanka had secretly given birth to Barron, and Melania had played her part in a careful plan to maintain appearances. Trump blinked, trying to regain control. At first, he laughed nervously, perhaps thinking the host was joking. But Letterman didn't pause or smile in a way that suggested he was playing around. He spoke with precision, detailing the timeline and the supposed actions taken to cover up the real pregnancy. Every word was chosen to leave room for thought without forcing a conclusion, a technique that made the audience lean closer, wanting to hear the next detail. Letterman began to lay out the story, piece by piece. He mentioned how Ivanka had disappeared from public view during the months of the supposed pregnancy. Work trips, modeling commitments, and private engagements had all been explained publicly as business-related absences. But according to insiders, Letterman claimed to have interviewed, these trips coincided exactly with the time Ivanka gave birth. In private, Melania's appearances were described in a new light. Loose clothing, careful positioning in photographs, and strategic public outings were all part of the alleged deception. Letterman framed it as a deliberate effort to convince the world that she was pregnant. While the truth remained hidden behind closed doors, even the dates of public announcements, hospital visits, and photo opportunities were presented as carefully coordinated steps in a story that the public had been led to believe was real. Trump attempted to interject, trying to assert his usual confidence and dismiss the claim. But Letterman's delivery made it hard to interrupt. He didn't need to shout or argue. The quiet seriousness of his voice made every sentence land, and each piece of information built on the last. The audience was captivated not just by the claim itself, but by the way it was presented. Letterman had created a sense of inevitability, a feeling that the story could be true simply because it was laid out logically, step by step. The host even hinted at insider accounts without making absolute claims. He spoke of stylists who allegedly created custom outfits to hide prosthetic devices, bodyguards who reportedly escorted Ivanka to private clinics, and carefully timed hospital visits that misled the public. Each element seemed small on its own, but together they painted a picture of a meticulously planned deception. The audience could hardly believe what they were hearing. For Trump, the situation was dizzying. He had entered the show expecting an easy conversation, a chance to showcase his confidence and humor. Instead, he found himself confronted with a narrative so wild, yet presented so calmly and logically, that even he had to pause and consider his words carefully. The usual tactics he relied on, charm, deflection, and forceful denial, felt inadequate. The first few moments of the interview had shifted the power dynamic entirely. Letterman, however, remained unshaken. He spoke softly, deliberately, and with a precision that made every word land with weight. He didn't need to shout, argue, or attack. He simply presented his story piece by piece, letting the audience and Trump fill in the gaps with their own imaginations. By the end of the opening segment, the atmosphere had changed completely. What had started as a standard interview had become a dramatic confrontation, a test of composure, and a revelation that even someone as confident as Donald Trump could be unsettled by careful questioning and bold claims. And in that moment, it became clear Trump had underestimated David Letterman. Letterman didn't waste time after dropping the bombshell. He moved carefully, deliberately, letting the audience absorb the shock of his claim before layering on details. That made it feel almost real. He began to outline the timeline of events, the sequence of moments that, according to him, revealed a secret carefully hidden from the public. It started with Ivanka. Letterman explained that during the months of Melania's supposed pregnancy, Ivanka vanished from public view. Officially, she was attending work trips, modeling engagements, and private meetings. All perfectly plausible excuses for a busy schedule. But Letterman suggested these absences were more than mere coincidences. They coincided with the actual time when Ivanka secretly gave birth. He didn't say it outright as fact. Instead, he presented it as a sequence of possibilities that fit together too neatly to ignore. The audience leaned in, hanging on every word. Letterman described how Ivanka, normally a frequent presence in media and family events, had slowly withdrawn into private life. Meetings, charity events, and fatudes were suddenly scheduled far away, always keeping her out of the public eye. At the same time, Melania began appearing in photos and videos wearing increasingly loose clothing. Sweaters, long coats, flowing dresses, all outfits carefully chosen to hide the shape of her body. Letterman asked the audience to consider this. Could a series of wardrobe choices and public appearances be entirely coincidental, or was there a pattern too precise to dismiss? Then came the insider accounts. Letterman told the story of a former stylist, someone who claimed to have worked closely with Melania during this time. According to this source, she had been instructed to design custom outfits that concealed prosthetic devices. These devices, the stylist claimed, were meant to create the appearance of a real pregnancy. Every photograph, every public smile, and every carefully angled shot was supposedly part of a plan to convince the world that Melania was expecting. Letterman continued, describing a bodyguard who spoke of escorting Ivanka to a private clinic. The claim was that Ivanka gave birth in secret while Melania continued to be photographed in public, showing off her pregnancy for the cameras. The audience listened in silence, caught between disbelief and fascination. Each element of the story seemed extraordinary, yet Letterman's.com precise narration made it feel like a puzzle coming together piece by piece. Even the hospital visits were included in the timeline. According to the host, Melania allegedly checked into the wrong wing of the hospital on the day Barron was born. Photos were taken, announcements were made, and the media reported the birth, as if it had happened in the public eye. Meanwhile, the actual delivery occurred in a private, undisclosed location. Letterman didn't shout or accuse. He simply told the story in a way that made the audience imagine it unfolding quietly, hidden behind the headlines. As the timeline unfolded, the audience began to see a pattern. Ivanka disappeared. Melania appeared pregnant, and every public appearance fit into a carefully designed sequence. Each day, each wardrobe choice, each flight or photo shoot, suddenly seemed part of a hidden plan rather than mere coincidence. Letterman asked subtle questions, letting the audience fill in the blanks themselves. He also painted a picture of how the family might have coordinated all of this. According to Letterman, it wasn't just about hiding a pregnancy. It was about controlling perception entirely. The timing of public events, the placement of Melania in photographs, and even the scheduling of press releases were all allegedly synchronized to create the perfect illusion. Letterman suggested that this level of control required careful planning and secrecy at every step. The audience couldn't help but be drawn into the story. It was structured like a mystery, where each clue, each absence, each outfit, each public smile built on the last. Letterman didn't need to exaggerate or shout. The facts as presented, combined with the logical flow of the timeline, created a sense of plausibility for a moment. It didn't matter whether the audience believed it or not. They were captivated by the possibility, following the story as it unfolded like a slowly turning page in a book. Letterman didn't stop at the appearances and absences. He emphasized how the small details fit together, suggesting coordination on a level most people wouldn't imagine. A flight here, a meeting there, a photo op designed to show a particular angle, all elements of a public narrative meticulously constructed to hide the truth. He asked the audience to consider how much effort would have been needed to maintain such an illusion. And in doing so, he subtly highlighted the enormity of the alleged deception. By the end of this segment, the audience could see a clear picture forming in their minds. Ivanka disappears. Melania appears pregnant. Custom outfits hide the truth. Private births happen. Public appearances continue. Every moment fits into a timeline that seems too exact to be accidental. Letterman had taken the audience step by step, showing them not just the claim itself, but the pattern that made it seem possible. For Trump, this timeline was like a challenge he hadn't expected. His usual confidence built on experience and media savvy felt tested. Each detailed Letterman presented added pressure, forcing Trump to respond to one carefully laid piece at a time. What began as a single shocking claim, the parentage of Baron Tat, had now grown into a complex story that put him on the defensive. He realized that he couldn't simply laugh, deny, or charm his way out of this. Letterman had constructed a timeline that demanded attention, reasoning, and scrutiny. And Trump was suddenly in a position where every word mattered. The moment was tense, but Letterman remained steady. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. By simply presenting the timeline with precision, calm narration, and a series of compelling claims, he had taken control of the conversation. For the audience, the story was no longer just a headline or a rumor. It had become a sequence of moments that, if true, revealed a secret carefully hidden behind public appearances and media images. And in presenting the timeline this way, Letterman made one thing clear. What seemed impossible at first could now be imagined, understood, and questioned. And Trump, who had walked in with all the confidence of a man used to commanding attention, was left grappling with the reality that this interview would be far more challenging than he had ever expected. Donald Trump had faced countless interviews, debates, and moments in the public eye that could unsettle most people. He had dealt with reporters who pressed him, comedians who mocked him, and political rivals who challenged him relentlessly. But nothing in his career had prepared him for what David Letterman was doing now. At first, Trump tried his usual approach, charm and confidence. He smiled, made a joke, and waved off the claim as absurd. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice steady, though just slightly forced. "Everyone knows Barron is Melania's son. Completely fake story." He leaned back, trying to regain control, convinced the audience would side with him. He had often relied on his charisma to sway opinion, and at first it seemed like it might work. But Letterman was patient. Letterman didn't need to yell, argue, or attack. He simply continued laying out his narrative calmly, allowing the details to pile up one by one. The first response was handled with ease by Trump, but then came the second. Letterman introduced more of his so-called insider accounts, mentioning the stylist who supposedly crafted custom maternity outfits to conceal a prosthetic pregnancy, and a bodyguard who claimed to have escorted Ivanka to a private clinic. Each piece of information was subtle but pointed. Trump tried to laugh it off, using sarcasm and bravado, claiming Letterman was fabricating everything. Yet, the audience's attention had shifted. They were no longer just listening. They were imagining the sequence of events, picturing the alleged coordination, and seeing Trump try to defend himself. By the third response, the situation changed entirely. Letterman's questions had become specific, layered, and unavoidable. He asked about the timing of Melania's appearances, about Ivanka's sudden absences, and about the logistics of the alleged private birth. Trump's responses grew shorter, sharper, defensive. He repeated denials, stumbled over phrasing, and attempted to redirect the conversation, but the flow of Letterman's questioning left little room to maneuver. It was as if the calm precision of Letterman's delivery was slowly cornering him. The president, who had walked in confident and unshakable, now appeared cautious. Each follow-up question felt like another reminder that his usual tactics, confidence, deflection, and charm were no longer sufficient. He realized, perhaps for the first time in such a public setting, that his words carried weight not just in their content, but in how they were perceived under pressure. Trump tried to inject humor, a strategy that often worked in debates and interviews. He made jokes about rumors, laughed at the suggestion, and waved his hands dismissively. But Letterman remained steady. He didn't laugh or argue, he just waited, letting each point sink in. The audience sensed the shift. What started as a seemingly outrageous claim now had a structure and rhythm. And Trump's repeated attempts to push back only reinforced the narrative of tension and uncertainty. Letterman then brought in another element of the story: the hospital visits. According to the host, Melania had allegedly checked into a public hospital wing on the day of Barron's birth, creating the appearance of giving birth, while the real delivery took place elsewhere. Trump's face tightened. He tried to laugh again, insisting the story was entirely false, but his words felt strained. The timeline that Letterman had carefully built now loomed over him. It wasn't a sudden attack, it was a series of connected events that challenged every statement he made. The host didn't need to confront Trump aggressively. The power of Letterman's approach lay in subtlety. Each detail of the alleged deception was presented calmly, logically, and with enough space for the audience to follow the reasoning themselves. Trump, on the other hand, had to respond to each point individually. trying to maintain his composure while defending against a carefully constructed narrative. His confidence, normally unshakable, was now being tested at every turn. Even more than the facts or claims themselves, the psychological pressure was intense. Letterman wasn't just presenting information, he was guiding the audience to notice patterns, to ask questions, and to wonder about what might have happened behind closed doors. Trump, who had expected to dominate the conversation, suddenly found himself reacting rather than leading. By the third response, his usual tactics of charm and assertive denial were failing to regain control. His words became repetitive, defensive, and increasingly cautious. The audience noticed the change. The initial bravado was giving way to hesitation. The laughter replaced with pauses, as Trump struggled to navigate the story Letterman had created. For a man who had built a career on confidence and control, it was a rare moment of vulnerability. Even supporters watching could sense that this was different from the interviews and debates they had seen him manage so confidently in the past. Letterman, meanwhile, remained calm. His questions never shouted, his tone never raised, and yet, his impact was undeniable. By carefully layering the claims, connecting timelines, and suggesting the possibility of insider accounts, he had created an environment where Trump could no longer rely on instinct alone. The president had to consider each word, each response, and each denial, all under the quiet but relentless pressure of public scrutiny. In that moment, it became clear that Trump had underestimated Letterman. He had assumed the host would be just another interviewer, someone who could be managed with charm, diversion, or forceful statements. Instead, Letterman had created a narrative structure that slowly, subtly, and effectively challenged him at every turn. What had begun as a late-night interview had transformed into a high-stakes confrontation of composure, strategy, and credibility. By the end of the third response, Trump's confident smile had faltered. His laughter was more strained, his words more cautious. He had entered the studio believing he could control the conversation. But he now faced a host who didn't play by the usual rules. Letterman didn't need to shout or attack. His calm precision was enough to unsettle one of the most confident men in the world. And Trump, it was a moment of rare recognition. He had misjudged his opponent, and every word from that point forward mattered more than ever. After the tension of the initial exchanges, David Letterman didn't let the story rest. He had planted the seed of doubt, and now he began to water it carefully, letting the audience's curiosity grow. Letterman's approach was simple. He didn't need to accuse or attack. He needed to build a trail of details that hinted at something larger, something hidden behind closed doors. He started by revisiting the alleged timeline, asking questions that sounded casual but carried weight. Where had Ivanka been during the months of Melania's supposed pregnancy? Why had Melania begun wearing loose-flowing outfits that suddenly appeared in public without explanation? Could these coincidences really be ignored, or were they part of a carefully constructed plan? Letterman didn't answer the questions himself. Instead, he turned to what he called whistleblowers, insiders who supposedly had knowledge of what really happened. The first account came from a former staff member who claimed to have seen Ivanka in private moments with Barron. According to this source, she had been secretly breastfeeding him. Letterman didn't sensationalize the claim. He simply presented it, letting the audience consider the implications. The way he told it made the story feel like a puzzle, each piece fitting into the timeline that had already been laid out. The claim was shocking, yet it was presented with a calm authority that made it seem plausible. Next, Letterman described accounts from a former stylist who said they had been instructed to create outfits that hid the appearance of pregnancy. Every dress, every coat, every angle of Melania's public photos was allegedly calculated to maintain an illusion. According to the stylist, the instructions came directly from someone in the family's inner circle, emphasizing secrecy above all else. Letterman didn't speculate about motives. He simply laid out the claim, letting it speak for itself. A bodyguard story added another layer. The source claimed he had personally escorted Ivanka to a private clinic for the birth, while Melania appeared in public as the expectant mother. These details aligned with the earlier timeline Letterman had described, reinforcing the idea of a carefully orchestrated cover-up. Each account seemed small on its own, but together they formed a pattern. Absence, appearance, secrecy. It was a story of control and careful planning, quietly unfolding beneath the public eye. Letterman emphasized that he was not claiming absolute knowledge. He framed everything as reports from insiders, carefully verifying what he could without exaggeration. The careful framing made the story feel credible while still leaving room for doubt. The audience found themselves caught between skepticism and fascination, imagining what could be true and what might be exaggerated. The tension grew with every detail, every new account, adding depth to the narrative. Then came the invitation that would escalate everything. Letterman invited the entire Trump family to a televised interview. The invitation wasn't framed as a confrontation. It was polite, public, and professional. But the refusal, which came swiftly, only added fuel to the growing speculation. The absence of the family, the silence in response to such a direct offer, spoke volumes. Letterman didn't need to comment. He let the refusal speak for itself. The audience, already captivated by the previous stories, now had another reason to wonder what was happening behind the scenes. Throughout this investigation, Letterman's technique was consistent. He didn't rely on anger, shouting, or sensationalism. He built suspense through logic, sequencing, and the careful layering of accounts. Every new detail added texture, revealing a picture of secrecy and control. It was as if the audience was watching a story slowly unfold in real time, each revelation compelling them to pay closer attention. Trump, meanwhile, found himself on increasingly unstable ground. The calm, methodical nature of Letterman's questions and claims made it difficult to respond as he normally would. He tried to dismiss the accounts as false, labeling the insider claims as fabrications. But with each denial, Letterman followed up with subtle questions or additional details, forcing Trump to defend himself repeatedly. By now, the president's responses were more cautious, measured, and at times defensive. The confidence that had carried him through countless interviews was giving way to a careful calculation of each word. The audience could feel the shift. Trump, who had walked in full of certainty, now seemed to be reacting more than leading. Every response was weighed, every denial analyzed. Letterman didn't need to attack. The story, carefully structured and supported by alleged insider accounts, did the work for him. The psychological pressure of being questioned in such a precise and persistent way was evident, and even the casual observer could see it. Letterman ended the segment by reviewing the claims one more time. Ivanka's secret absences, Melania's carefully managed appearances, the alleged hospital cover-up, and the accounts from stylists and bodyguards. He didn't insist these stories were true, but by presenting them together, he created a compelling narrative that challenged the audience to question what they thought they knew. He left the details hanging in the air, a chain of possibilities that required careful thought, and in doing so, he shifted the focus entirely onto Trump's ability to respond. By the end of this investigative segment, the balance of power in the interview had shifted. Trump, who had begun the night, confident and in control, was now navigating a story that Letterman had meticulously built step by step. Each claim, each timeline, and each refusal of the family to respond quietly reinforced the story's tension. Letterman had managed to turn what started as a single bombshell into a structured narrative, one that was impossible to ignore and difficult to refute. For the audience, it was mesmerizing. They were not just hearing claims. They were following a story, a sequence of events, a timeline of secrets that seemed both incredible and possible. Letterman had transformed the interview from a casual chat into a careful investigation, one that exposed cracks in the usual confidence of a man who rarely showed uncertainty. By methodically presenting the details, layering accounts, and letting silence do part of the work, Letterman had created a tension that would define the remainder of the show. And through it all, Trump had no choice but to listen, to respond, and to grapple with the realization that the night was no longer under his control. Letterman had taken him from a position of dominance to one of cautious defense, demonstrating the power of patience, precision, and strategic storytelling. The investigation wasn't just about uncovering a secret, it was about showing that even the most confident figures can be challenged when confronted with a careful, deliberate narrative. By the time the final segment of the interview approached, the mood in the studio had shifted completely. What had begun as a routine late-night appearance had transformed into a high-stakes confrontation that neither the audience nor Trump would forget. Letterman had presented his timeline, layered insider accounts, and carefully framed questions with precision. The calm, methodical pressure had worn on Trump, and it was clear that the president was no longer fully in control of the conversation. Trump's responses had grown shorter, sharper, and more defensive as the interview continued. His laughter, once confident and self-assured, had started to sound forced. His attempts to redirect the conversation had become obvious, almost mechanical. Every point he made was met with Letterman's calm follow-up, a quiet but persistent reminder that the host had the rhythm of the dialogue in his hands. It wasn't confrontation in the traditional sense. It was subtle, structured, and almost surgical in its impact. The final straw came when Letterman revisited the key elements of his story: Ivanka's secret absences, Melania's carefully managed appearances, the alleged hospital cover-up, and the insider accounts from stylists and bodyguards. He asked questions that seemed simple on the surface, but each carried an unspoken weight. They required Trump to respond not just with denials, but with explanations that could hold up under scrutiny. By now, Trump's usual tactics, charm, deflection, and bravado, were failing to restore the balance. For a man accustomed to commanding attention and controlling the narrative, The moment was tense. The audience could sense the shift. The confident, larger-than-life figure who had entered the studio now seemed cornered, struggling to maintain composure under the quiet but relentless pressure. Every word he spoke was measured, every denial carefully calculated. Yet the calm structure of Letterman's narrative left him little room to maneuver. Finally, after one particularly pointed line of questioning about the hospital visits and the alleged private birth, Trump made a decision. He stood uttering a tour statement about the accusations being completely false and threatening legal action against Letterman for defamation. Then he left the interview abruptly, walking away before the segment could conclude. The exit was sudden, almost shocking in its finality. The audience, caught in suspense for the last hour, remained silent for a moment, processing what had just happened. The impact of Trump's departure extended beyond the studio. Even without raising his voice, Letterman had managed to shift the perception of the evening. By calmly presenting his claims, framing timelines, and incorporating insider accounts, he had turned what should have been a simple interview into a public examination of control, credibility, and secrecy. Trump, who had expected to dominate the conversation as he had so many times before, was forced to retreat. The refusal of the Trump family to participate in the follow-up televised interview also amplified the tension. The invitation, simple and professional, was ignored, and in doing so, it lent credibility to the growing suspicions. Letterman did not need to comment on the refusal. The silence spoke volumes. For viewers, it was yet another piece of the puzzle, reinforcing the sense that there was more to the story than what had been visible publicly. In the days following the interview, the episode became a subject of quiet discussion among political observers, commentators, and anyone interested in media and public perception. Analysts debated how the combination of careful narrative, layered details, and precise questioning had created a situation where even a man as confident as Trump appeared unsettled. Letterman's approach became a case study in subtle influence, not through confrontation or aggression, but through patient, deliberate storytelling that built momentum gradually. Trump himself reportedly reacted with frustration and disbelief. Privately, he insisted the entire story was fabricated, dismissing every claim made on the show. He threatened lawsuits, condemning Letterman for defamation and accusing the hosts of spreading falsehoods. Yet, despite the threats, the perception of the evening had already been shaped. Letterman had achieved something rare. He had created a situation where the president's responses, the refusals of the family, and the carefully constructed timeline together created tension that was difficult to ignore. The audience, meanwhile, remembered the night vividly. The combination of a bold claim, detailed timeline, insider accounts, and subtle questioning created a narrative that was both shocking and compelling. What began as a single accusation, the parentage of Barron evolved into a layered story that challenged assumptions, raised questions, and captivated attention without sensationalism or exaggeration. Letterman had shown that the quiet, methodical presentation of information could be more powerful than shouting or confrontation. In the end, the interview became a lesson in underestimation. Trump, who had walked in confident, left unsettled, realizing that skill, patience, and precision could outmaneuver even the most assured personalities. Letterman, through calm questioning and structured storytelling, had revealed that control of a narrative does not always belong to the loudest or most confident person in the room. The exit of Trump and the unresolved questions surrounding the claims left a lasting impression. Viewers were left to consider what might have happened behind the scenes and to reflect on the subtle power of storytelling and questioning. The episode became more than a simple television appearance. It was a demonstration of how persistence, calm authority, and carefully structured investigation could expose cracks even in the most confident figures. Ultimately, the night stood as a reminder that underestimating someone, even in what seems like a straightforward situation, can lead to unexpected outcomes. It showed that preparation, patience, and the power of narrative could shape perception in ways that raw confidence alone could not. And for Trump, it was a rare public encounter, where the usual certainty and control he relied on were tested and found wanting. The interview ended with Trump gone, the family absent, and the audience left with a story that would linger in memory. Letterman's.com. Deliberate approach had changed the evening from a routine appearance into a tense and unforgettable examination of perception, secrecy, and human reaction. It was a demonstration of how skillful questioning and structured storytelling could create drama and uncertainty even in the life of a man who rarely hesitated or faltered.